let us put hands on hearts, feel the warm connection there, that simple gesture of self-care. Let care and love in this moment flow. Say to yourself silently, I will love myself. I will love others, and that love will help heal our world. And now the joys and sorrows of our beloved community. Carol Ann Arvin's mama, Christy Kinsall, fell and broke her right, previously unbroken hip. Now she has matching replacements. She is back at Canterbury Court for another round of rehab. Cards and emails are appreciated. We widen our concern beyond these walls to bring awareness to the United Methodist Church. This week we saw this second largest body of Christians in America struggle with the LGBTQ people in its midst. On Tuesday, the vote by church officials and lay members from around the world was to double down on current church policy, which states that the practice of homosexuality is incompatible with Christian teaching. The vote served as a rejection of a push by progressive members and leaders to open the church to lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender people. We are hurting today with LGBTQ folks in the Methodist world and beyond. And like my colleague Jake Morrill says, no denomination, not mine or any other, is God. And no denominational action could add to or subtract from the perfect love God has for you exactly as you wonderfully are, because of who and how you are, not in spite of it. Thank you for however you use or will use your gifts for ministry, whether lay or ordained. Of course, Jake goes on to say, whatever particular news any day brings, love wins in the end. It's just that sometimes it takes a little while. So may it be. At this time, I invite you to say out loud the names of people you are holding in your heart this morning. Let silence be our sanctuary now. We take in a big breath, and then we exhale. We gently surrender to something larger than ourselves. We enter into the wise silence.
March is Teacher Recruitment Month, and I'd like to invite Liebs Liebman up here to share some of her thoughts about teaching at UUCA.
Good morning, everybody. When I started teaching RE here at UUCA last March, I had only been a member for about a month, and I'd only been identifying as UU for about a week longer than that. And I was terrified, right? How could I possibly teach anyone about Unitarian Universalism when I was so new to it myself? Then I was reminded that we're a faith that values the free and responsible search for truth and meaning. No one was going to expect me to know all the right answers. And we're UU, so most of the time there aren't any right answers. And that got me through the first lesson. Since then, I've been able to take a journey with the teachers and the students in my class as we go on our search for truth and meaning. I found that traveling with this group helped me discover some of my own truths, and the shared connection has also helped me to articulate my meanings to those around me. I don't feel like I am teaching kids. I feel like I'm on a journey with friends. And I encourage all of you, when the opportunity comes, to sign up to join us on the journey and join the RE team. And right now, I'm going to go get back to my journey.
Thank you, Liebs. At the end of the month, we will have a teacher recruitment fair in the social hall after both services, where you can sign up to teach RE next year. Please take a few weeks to consider teaching in the religious education program. See how it can enrich your life as it has Liebs. Now this Sunday's offering will be given and gratefully received. Please give generously.
Blessed day, the dark, sacred night, and I think to myself, what a wonderful world. The colors of the rainbow, so pretty in the sky, are also on the faces of people going by. I see friends shaking hands, saying, how do you do? They're really saying, I love you. I hear babies cry, I watch them grow. They'll learn much more than I'll ever know. And I think to myself, what a wonderful world. Yes, I think to myself.
thank you for your generosity this morning. I love what Liebs had to say about going on a journey with friends. Remember how she said that? And that is what your financial generosity is allowing us to do, is to help people go on a journey with friends. And it takes you to unexpected places. I know in my own case, in the church I used to go to 1,000,000 years ago, the Unitarian Universalist congregation in College Station, Texas. I started out as an RE teacher, and then I was in our fundraising committee, and then I did a little bit of preaching, right? And then I joined our board of trustees, and I was the board president one year. And it's just to say, look at where it's taken me. Now, I'm not saying it's going to take you right here, but who knows what journey you'll be going on with friends and where that will take you. And it's because of your gifts that you make that possible for people. So thank you.
Now please join me in the dedication of the offering, which is found in your order of service. To the work of this congregation, which is weaving a tapestry of love and action we call community, we dedicate our lives and these our offerings.
The African tribe of Yoruba likes to tell this ancient story about its trickster god, Ishu. One day, Ishu began a journey wearing a hat, red on one side, white on the other. Making not a sound, he walked between two friends, one seeing the white side of his hat, the other seeing the red. Later in the day, the two friends spoke to one another about the mysterious man in the hat. Immediately, they began to argue about what color the hat was, white, red. The quarreling turned to blows as each man professed to know the right answer and demanded to be acknowledged as the victor in this violent discussion. The trickster god Ishu chuckled at the sight, and he walked over to these men, now bloodied and angry, and he showed them his hat, red on one side, white on the other. He was delighted by the fact that they would fight about something as ridiculous as the color of a man's hat, ruining a long-standing friendship in the process, taking pleasure in testing the strengths and weaknesses of mankind. Ishu provides the lesson of making the right choices in life. Ishu can see in all directions, watches what people do, good or bad. His punishment is swift, but also kind. Ishu is found at the crossroads. That's the ancient story. And if I were to modernize it so that it can speak specifically to current issues of concern, well, I would change it like this. One day, Ishu began a journey wearing a hat, and this hat was fully covered by a special HD TV screen that projected crystal clear images of three of the most pressing issues of our time: mass immigration, cultural modernization, and globalization. Making not a sound, he walked between the two friends, who saw images flashing on that screen-covered hat. One image was that of a caravan of Central American migrants approaching the United States border. Another image was of LGBTQ United Methodist pastors, and also empowered women like U.S. Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. And a third image was of factories in the United States closing down and reopening in China. Images like that beaming off of Ishu's hat. The two friends spoke to each other about what they saw, and immediately the arguments began. One friend, who could be called a right-wing populist, or an authoritarian nationalist, was deeply offended. For him, there could be no loyalty beyond that of the law and the will of his nation, which happened to be embodied in that nation's great leader. And here's what that great leader said: that immigrants were an infestation upon the land, and national racial purity needed to be upheld. He says, historically marginalized identities pursuing their rights needed to stop being so uppity and get back to the way it was. He says that cooperation with other nations is weakness, while strength is going it alone. That's what the great leader said. All of which made the other friend shout out in fury and frustration, "What your great leader is saying is wrong. What you take to be the worst of evils is not so, but cause for rejoicing." For this friend, upon seeing images of migrants, he understood something, that traumas would lead families to undertake dangerous journeys to new lands and into new lives. And he affirmed their right to do so, to pursue happiness and to pursue wholeness. Furthermore, he knew that multiculturalism was the strength of a people, not a weakness. As for those images of LGBTQ United Methodist pastors and empowered women like U.S. Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, he found himself inspired by their persistence and their courage. Since he happened to be a straight white male, he searched himself for ways in which he might use his privilege to further support all historically marginalized communities in their growth towards equality and justice. And as for that image of factories closing down in the United States and reopening in China, that image of globalization and one of its impacts, well, of course, he rued that. He's sad about the local consequences of the loss of jobs, and he was led to wonder about whether global trade could be better regulated. But then he flashed upon another dimension of globalization, which has to do with problems that do not obey national borders, problems that require solutions which are international in scope, problems like climate change, problems like mass migration. Let us call this second friend a cosmopolitan, as opposed to a right-wing populist / authoritarian nationalist. As a cosmopolitan, he embraces loyalty to his country, but also feels loyalty to the world as a whole, to humanity as a whole. He knows, furthermore, that the laws of a land may be out of sync with what is good and what is right. And whenever any great leader passes a law that violates human rights, that law is to be resisted. This is how the two friends differed, why they responded the way they did to Ishu's hat, and why it led them to fighting. And the trickster god Ishu, he chuckled at the sight, and he walked over to the men. He took off his hat, and he reached inside it, and he pulled out an article from The Atlantic. Just stay with me here. He pulled out an article from The Atlantic on the topic of the behavioral immune system. Well, the two friends looked confusedly at Ishu, wondering what on earth that had to do with anything. And some of you were looking at me like that too. Ishu said, "Just listen and learn." Quoting the article's author, Kathleen McAuliffe, he said, "As we move about in our world, a sizable volume of research shows that our minds are constantly searching our surroundings for contaminants, moldy leftovers, garbage spilling out of trash cans, a leaky sewage pipe. And when the brain detects them, it triggers feelings of revulsion, of yuck. Confronted, we withdraw from the threat. The mechanism is a part of what is known as the behavioral immune system, and it is vital for survival, as vital for survival as the fight or flight response." Now, Ishu went on to develop this line of thought, that for purposes of safety and survival, evolution gives people a germ radar that's constantly scanning the environment for contaminants, for yucky stuff, and the resulting feeling is disgust. And that disgust feeling is a message, sending a message to you. It's a threat, stay away, danger, it could hurt you. But then the main thing he wanted to say, Ishu wanted to say to the two friends, is he wanted them to see how all of this lines up with political affiliation, with one of them being a conservative, right-wing populist type and the other being a liberal cosmopolitan type. To this end, Ishu mentioned two things. One was how science shows that conservatives tend to have higher levels of sensitivity to disgust than liberals. I think I just heard an amen from there. Neuroscientist Reed McMontague once hooked 83 folks up to an MRI scan, to scan their brains as they looked at a variety of subjects. It turned out that the brains of liberals and conservatives reacted similarly to violent images and to pleasurable images. But when pictures of repulsive things were shown, the reaction of conservative brains was off the charts, whereas the reaction of liberal brains was much milder. Dr. Montague was able to predict with 95% accuracy whether the person whose brain he was scanning happened to be politically liberal or politically conservative, 95%. The second thing Ishu mentioned was that the behavioral immune system tends to go overboard. He quoted Kathleen McAuliffe again on how our behavioral immune system is error-prone in flagging danger. It produces a lot of false positives. Any physical oddity displayed by the people around us. Don't take this time to look around at the folks around you, just looking at me. Any physical oddity, contagious or not, can set off the alarm. Just as a pink eye, a hacking cough, or an open wound may activate our behavioral immune system, so too can a birthmark, a deformity, obesity, disability, even liver spots. Furthermore, having germs on our mind can affect how we feel about people who are just different from us, how we perceive them as different from us, different race, different ethnicity. In other words, said Ishu to the two friends, your behavioral immune system likes to exaggerate so that what is merely odd or different can trigger full-blown disgust, and this propensity to exaggerate only increases in proportion to how sensitive a person is. And that is when the liberal friend triumphantly cried out, "Aha! Aha!" Turning to his conservative friend, he cried out, "No wonder you got so upset at that Super Bowl ad from back in 2014, which featured immigrants singing different stanzas of America the Beautiful in their native tongues." Do you remember that ad? I remember how grossed out you were by that, and how you insisted that that song should be sung only in English. No wonder you are feeling so threatened by gains in real equality in LGBTQ people, people of color, the disabled, the poor, and other historically marginalized communities. No wonder that you feel so hostile and so cynical about loyalty to global well-being and cooperation with other nations to solve world problems. No wonder, said the more liberal, cosmopolitan friend, as if that solved anything. At which point, the more conservative right-wing populist type shot back with, well, two can play at this game. No wonder liberals like you could be so clueless and naive, so oblivious to the dangers that multiculturalism and justice movements for marginalized identities and globalization represent. No wonder. And for the moment, the two friends just glared at each other. And then Ishu signaled them to stop. Stop. With a voice as solemn as a judge's, he said, "I am the trickster God And I take pleasure in testing the strengths and weaknesses of people like you. And both of you are found wanting. What? Said the liberal cosmopolitan friend. But right is on my side. There is no middle ground between affirming human rights and denying them. There is no middle ground there. There is nothing admirable or honorable on the side of a great leader who uses words for animals and rodents like infest to describe people. A word, I will add, that was often used in Rwanda during genocide, comparing people to roaches. And the trickster God said, I agree. I agree with all of that. But where you lack is in your sense of compassion. Your conservative, right-wing populist friend is by nature more sensitive to you, to that which disgusts. Combine that with how the behavioral immune system tends to exaggerate mere oddities and differences into full-blown threats, and what you have is someone who is peculiarly vulnerable to being manipulated by great leader bullies. Listen to me. I am the trickster God, Ishu. But the great leaders of this world, the Trumps, the Putins, the Erdogans, the Orbans, the Dudas, all the right-wing populist demagogues, they outdo even me in their trickery. Just listen to a list of some of their tactics as described by writer Doug Mooder. They define foes rather than formulate policies. They create unending struggle and crisis. And the less factual the struggle, the easier it is to maintain. A real struggle might actually come up to some kind of conclusion, but an entirely made-up one never will. So, for example, the millions of illegal voters who decide American elections, well, they can't be stopped because they're not even real. The struggle against them is going to go on forever. Democrats can never stop trying to take your guns because they weren't trying to take your guns away in the first place. The war on Christmas. It's going to come back every year regardless of anything that the faithful might do to defend themselves. People believe these narratives because they are emotionally satisfying, not because they are factual. And the point for the great leader is not to win rational argument, but to make rational argument impossible. Authoritarianism arrives, not because people say they want it, but because they lose the ability to distinguish between facts and desires. And saying all of this, Ishu fell silent. And then he looked into the eyes of the liberal cosmopolitan into his eyes and said with sadness, your conservative right-wing friend is in a perpetual state of trauma, stoked by the great leader, and traumatized people spread the trauma. Terrorized people spread the terror. In your compassion, you must get to the root of the thing, which is a constant feeling of fear and unsafety. Help your friend feel more safe, and maybe a better path can open up for both of you. And at this point, Ishu, the trickster God, turned to the conservative, right-wing populist friend. As for you, he said, your failure is in succumbing to the emotional satisfactions of the great leader's hateful performances, his outrageous conspiracy theories, all the tweets, all the drama that he generates. Science tells us that you are uniquely susceptible to fear-mongering, but both science and religion tell us that you are a human being with free will. And your biology cannot compel you to indulge in being terrorized, and nor can it compel you to commit atrocities for the so-called good of your country. You must get away from the hate-based, fear-based messages, even as they light up your nervous system and give you a kind of emotional high. Terrible though it may be, it is still a high. Give up your addiction to that before evil swallows you whole. There is a book you must read, continued Ishu, The Trickster God. It is by Rabindranath Tagore, and it is called The Home and the World. In that book, the young wife, Bimala, is entranced by the dramatic right-wing rhetoric of her husband's friend, Sandeep, and she becomes an eager follower of a nationalist movement that's trying to boycott foreign goods. Bimala complains about her husband, who is a cosmopolitan Hindu landlord. His name is Nikhil, who is not very sympathetic towards the right-wing movement. But now listen to what he has to say about it all, his defense. He says, I am willing to serve my country, but my worship I reserve for the true and the good and the right alone. It is far greater than my country. To worship my country as a god is to bring a curse upon it. And with this, Ishu picks up his hat, puts it on his head, walks away from the village, and he's gone. And the friends look at each other in shock. And they come together. And together, they walk slowly and thoughtfully towards their village. And that is the modernized version of the ancient Ishu story. Modernized to speak to some of the urgencies of our day. And as in ancient times, so now, Ishu can see in all directions. He watches what people do, good or bad. His punishment is swift, but also kind. In a time of polarization worldwide and close to home, when crises abound and lives are at stake, may we find a sane way through to peace, and may Ishu smile upon us. It is said he is found at the crossroads, and that is where we are today. Amen.
Our final hymn this morning is number 159. This is my song. Please rise in body or in spirit. Come up and sing. I'll sing alto.
This is my
Please join hands for the benediction. If you are a guest with us this morning, I hope that you had a great experience and you got some really good soul food that'll keep you fed all week long. And of course, I hope the same for our regular attenders. And I want to speak to our regular attenders just for a moment. We have a special responsibility to offer open arms hospitality to people who are new upon us. And last month, I introduced a certain rule. Do you guys remember what that rule was? Rule of 3. Let me just remind you, the rule of 3 is essentially about not talking to other regulars that you know for 3 minutes after I send us out in the world. Boom, after I do that, don't talk to regulars for 3 minutes. Talk to folks you might have never talked to before. Now, this month I want to add on to that by suggesting 3 things that to say, which are helpful. And one is simply, thank you for being here. It's just that simple. Guests often return just because someone thanked them for being here. Second one, let me introduce you to someone. Let me introduce you. These initial meetings can pave the way for one of those journeys of friends that can end up, who knows? It's a beautiful thing. Number 3, would you join me or join us for lunch? There's something powerfully bonding about people gathering around food and getting to know each other. Did you know it takes about 3 minutes for folks to exit this congregation after worship and they're gone? So we want to connect with them before those 3 minutes are up. That is the Lord saying amen. Just kidding. So let's practice the rule of 3 as we go from this place. We have a beautiful thing to offer, and let's give it away as fast as we can. You ready? Go in peace.